Now we're up to Daf Yutesa with Beis. So the Gemara now brings proof for the Shita that we mentioned earlier of Rav and Rav Huna, like Zeras Batlu Yomi Moed. But Tanya, we learned that way in a Brisa. Kover es meso shlosha yomim kodem l'regel. So it means he already observed the Avelus of Shiva for 3 days. We said that Shiva and the Kiyum of Shiva requires a minimum of 3 days. So he finished with his 3 days. Now the regel comes along. Is Batle Menuk Zera Shiva. Now the regel completely undermines and cancels Shiva. Shmona Yom Kodem l'regel Batle Menuk Zera Shloshim. If on day 8, after the Kvuras HaMes, he's already undergone the entire Avelus of Shiva plus 1 day of Shloshim, is Batlei Menuk Zera Shloshim. And what's the point of being Mavatal Zera Shloshim? It's to allow him to take a haircut and a shave. So we were lenient in undermining the laws of Avelus of Shloshim and the Isa Giluach for the sake of Yantif. As long as he had a Kiyum of Shloshim on day 8, which is the first day of the 30 days. But he didn't take advantage of that opportunity, that leniency, to allow him, through the law of Bittul, to take a shave on Erev Yantif. In that case, he does not have a kiyum of Avelus Shloshim. The kiyum of Avelus Shloshim is. Just 1 second. Oh, this doesn't make sense. I thought I had it. Give me a second here. In lo gilach erev regel regel. 1 second. He should have taken. So I think the way it works is like this. The Giluach itself is the Bittul of Shloshim. So that on day 8, which is the first day of Shloshim, he's in sort of a Pashas Drachim, meaning the 2 roads diverted. He has 2 possibilities. Either he can observe Shloshim by abstaining from Giluach, and then he goes right into Yontif, and Shloshim could still coincide with Yontif, because as we said before, there's no inherent contradiction that makes Yontif and Shloshim mutually exclusive. But if he shaves on Erev Yontif, that itself is the bittul of Shloshim, meaning once the halacha allows him to shave, in this case for the sake of Yontif, and number 2, he went ahead and he shaved, then he with his 2 hands, he what's the word I want to use? He cancels the Shloshim. And a better word for the, all right, cancels is good enough. So therefore, logi leach erev regel. So then Shloshim and regel flow together with a long Iser Giluach of Shloshim Yom, because the Avelus of Shloshim was never bought. Avashol omer mutar legaleach achar regel. Shekshem shemitzvahs shlosha mevateles zera shiva, mitzvah shiva mevateles zeras shlosha. So according to Abba Shaul, he doesn't need the Giluach per se on Erev Yontif in order to be Mevatel Shloshim. Why? Because according to Abba Shaul, if he doesn't shave on the 8th day, which is Erev Yontif, that itself is a kiyum of shloshim, of Avelu Shloshim. By abstaining from shaving, he has now fulfilled shloshim. Once he fulfills shloshim, then we apply the following analogy. Just like once you were Makayim Shiva with 3 days of Shiva, Regel is Mevatel Shiva, so too, once you were Makayim 1 day of shloshim, which is day 8 of Simpson's Tvura, which was fulfilled through his abstaining from shaving. So now Regel comes along and it's Mevatel Shloshim. In other words, according to Abba Shaul, the compelling logic is that Regel is a day of Simcha and Shloshim is a day of Avelus, and those are mutually exclusive. I'll just read to you his note of it. He says, if burial took place 3 days before Yontif, Yontif is Mevatel Shiva. Why is that? Because he was Makayim already the mitzvah of Shiva. Now he writes that it's clear in such a case he cannot shave because he hasn't yet been Makayim the mitzvah of Shloshim. Shloshim doesn't begin. He goes straight from Shiva into Yontif. Says Abba Shaul, if burial took place far enough in advance of the Yontif for Shloshim to have begun, yeah, the festival cancels Shloshim. But he doesn't add anything to what we said. Shiva, Vanan Shmonetnan. The Mishnah seems to indicate that it's only on day 8 that Yontif can be Mevatel Shloshim. And yet Abba Shaul, as quoted in the previous brisa, said, Kach mitzvah Shiva Mevatel Zeret Shloshim, which means that even on day 7, we cancel Shloshim. You follow? It's the kiyum here was Shiva. That's Mevatel Shloshim. How could that be? We need a kiyum of Shloshim, and he didn't get to day 8. So the Gemara answers, Kasover Abba Shaul, Mixayom Kikula, according to Abba Shaul, once he gets to day 7 in the morning, and he's Makayim Avelus in the morning of day 7, that's a full kiyum of Avelus of Shiva. It's as if he was Makayim Avelus the entire day because of Mixayom Kikulo. The Yom Hashvi, now, immediately after the Mixas Hayom in the morning of day 7, he immediately transitions into Shloshim. So on day 7, according to Abba Shaul, he already has a kiyum of Shloshim. So to sum, we have 2 issues that divide the Chachamim and Abba Shaul. First of all, whether or not Yontif is Mevatel Shloshim. And secondly, whether Mixayom Kikula. Om Rav Chizar Ravina Bar Shilo, Halacha Abba Shaul, which sounds like we're applying the principle of Halacha Kidivrei HaMekil V'Avel, which we learned on the top of Daf, was it Yudzayin or Yud Ches? Yeah, top of Daf Yud Ches. Umodim Chacham El Abba Shaul Kishachal Shmini Shelo Lios B'Shabbos Erev Haregel. If the 8th day of his Avelus was Shabbos, and it was Erev Yontif, Shemutal Galech the Erev Shabbos. So in other words, the Chachamim are going to accept the principle of Mixas Hayom Kikulo to allow him to shave for Shabbos and Yontif, right? Because there's an overlap now of Shabbos and Yontif, meaning if Shabbos is on Erev Yontif and you don't allow him to shave on Erev Shabbos, then he won't be able to shave for Shabbos. He won't be able to shave right on Friday. He won't be able to shave on Saturday for the Yontif of Motzi Shabbos. So for the combination of, let's push Kvod Shabbos and Kvod Yontif, we're going to allow for the principle of Abba Shol to operate, namely Miksayom Kekulo. And therefore, the seventh day of his Avelus is on a Friday. Friday morning, he will have a kiyum of Miksayom Kekulo, and the balance of Friday is Shloshim. He already now has a kiyum of Shloshim, and the Yontif is going to be Mavatal Shloshim. Kiman Azal Hod Yomer of Amram Amarav. Ovel Kevin Sha'omdu Menachem Emetzlo Mutar Rechitza Kiman Kabashol. We have halacha Miksayom Kekulo on the seventh day. As soon as the last Menachem or Menachem pack out, he's already fulfilled the Miksayom Kekulo. He has a kiyum near Gavelus, and it's as if he was knowing Gavelus the entire day, and therefore he's allowed to take a shower, a hot bath. Now, what happens if no one showed up to be Menachem him on that last day, day 7? So there are more paskins that he can get up from Shiva after a period of time passes in which normally a Menachem would show up. So even though before no Menachem showed up. We apply and accept the principle of Miksayom Kekulo on the seventh day of Shiva. Umodim Chacham Labishol B'Yom Shloshim. The Amrina Miksayom Kekulo, although the Chachamim reject Miksayom Kekulo with regard to the seventh day of Shiva, but they accept it with regard to day 30 of Shloshim. And we see this is another example of a Kula in Shloshim vis-a-vis Shiva. Rav Amar Loch Kabishol B'Yom Shloshim. Rava says we're only going to accept the final halacha like Abed Shol in the case of Shloshim. It seems that Rava assumes there's a machlokas between the Chachamim and Abed Shol about Miksayom Kekulo even on day 30, not like we said before, in the name of Abai. And we will only accept Abed Shol of Miksayom Kekulo with regard to Shloshim. That's what we're going to be making. But not with regard to Shiva. So it sounds like Rav is not willing to accept the principle of halacha k'divrei meikil be omer. He could have easily passed like Abba Shol to be meikil on the seventh day of Avelus, and he did not do so. I suspect that the reason for this is because Miksas Hayom Kekulo is not an Avelus halacha. It applies to Avelus, according to Abba Shol and according to Chacham and Shloshim, perhaps. But it's really universal halacha. Miksayom Kekulo applies here, there, and elsewhere. Like, for example, in another shir I give here, in about an hour from now, we're learning the laws of Zovo. In the case of Zovo, she needs Zayin Akiyim. When she gets to the morning of day 7, she can make a Badika and call it a Yom Naki, even though she still has 12 hours to go until day 7 is ended. Nardoi will apply the principle halacha k'divrei meikil from beginning to end. We're going to accept Abba Shol's kula of Miksayom Kekulo not only at the end of Shloshim, but even at the end of Shiva. And I suspect that Nardoi understands that Miksayom Kekulo applies in a unique way in every single area of halacha. So if we'll be machmir in one area of halacha and say, well, no, there's no Miksayom Kekulo, we could still be making an ovel, because in ovel it applies in its own unique way, and halacha k'divrei meikil ba'ovel. Yom Shmuel halacha k'divrei meikil ba'ovel. Shloshim Yomi Nola. What's the source for the 30-day Easter of Giluach for an ovel? And it's Xerish Shav Yolif. Pera minoz sivhacha. With regard to the death of Nadav Avihu, God commands Itamar, Elazar and Itamar to abstain from Avelus, meaning not to be Avelu. And therefore, Ashechem al tifro, don't let your hair grow. You'll have to cut your hair. So that's the word tifro from Yiloshan Perek. Hasam, Siv Hasam in the case of Nazir. Gadel Pera Siar Rosho. Nazir has to let his hair grow. And how long does the Nazir, minimum, have to let his hair grow? For 30 days. Malahalan Shloshim Af Kan. Just like in Nazir, it's 30 days that he must grow his hair and he's not allowed to cut it. So too with regard to Avelus, with the exception of Elazar and Itamar, the Avel is enjoined from cutting his hair for 30 days. For Hassam, how do you know in Naziris it's 30 days? Rush State does. Masna, Stam Nazir Shloshim Yom. And this is a mission at the beginning of a Masechet Nazir, that when a person just takes upon himself Nazirus, Hareini Nazir, then he's Nazir for 30 days. My time, why 30 days? Omar Kroy, here's a gematria. People think that gematria is not important, but here's an important gematria. Omar Kroy Kadosh Yeh. The Torah describes the Nazir as Yeh. He's going to be holy. And Yeh is Yud, and Yud is 20. Hey and Hey is 10. 10 and 20 is 30. Is Yeh, gematria Talsin Hava. Omar Avuna Bered Rabbi Yeshua. Kol Modim Kishachal Shlishi Shalo. Leos, Erev, Haregel, Sha'asuk, Rechitza, Ad Ha'erev. What happens is he has not yet finished up that barest minimum, the what's it called, the bare bones of Avelus, which is 3 days. Why? Because on the third day of Avelus, it's Erev Yontif. And certainly he wants to wash his body for Yontif. Not sure exactly why he mentions Erev Yontif, not Erev Shabbos. Okay, we'll leave that question aside. I don't want to get sidetracked. Now, it's interesting. There's no mixed Sayom Kekulo with regard to the 3 days of Shiva. That's got to be 3 full days. And even Abba Shaul would admit to that. Amar Rav Nechemia, Breder Rav Yeshua, Ashkechinu Rav Papi, Rav Papa, the Yasvei V'Kamei Alochik Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. So they accepted this chumrah that with regard to the 3 days of Avelus, we need all 3 days in order to generate a kiyum of Shiva Avelus. And we're not going to allow any flexibility on Erev Yontif, even though there's a mitzvah rechitza on Erev Yontif. Doesn't matter, an Avel is enjoined from rechitza. Ika Diamri, according to a different transmission, Omar Rav Nechemia Breid Rav Yosef. Ashkechinu, Rav Papi, Rav Papa, Rav Huna Breid Rav Yeshua, the Yasvei, V'Kol Amrei, Hakol Modim Shemchal Shlishi Shol Yosberev, Regel, Osur, Berchitz Erev. So there's no difference here between the first transmission and the second, except in the second transmission, we add Rav Huna Bered Rav Yeshua. No, we had Rav Huna Bered. Let's say who we adding here. Who are we adding? 1 second. Rav Nechemia. Oh, I see. It's a different Rav Nechemia. Okay, the 2 Rav Nechemias. Next, boy, Minei Abaye mi Rabba Kavru Beregel. They buried the dead during the regel, which means that the shiva will be postponed until after the regel. What about shloshim? Is regel olul minyan shloshim, which means he only has to count 23 days after the regel, or ein regel olul minyan shloshim, because the regel is essentially days of simcha. You cannot integrate days of simcha into 30 days of Avelus. So what was the tzad to say that regel is all minyan shloshim? Because they're identical. Just like during shloshim, the Avel is enjoined from laundering his clothing and from cutting his hair. so too during the regel, those isurim apply. So there's a perfect overlap between regel and shloshim. Abai expands on his question. He says, "Leminyan shiva lo kami boile." For sure, there's no question that the days of regel are not counted towards shiva, because since regel is Mechayev Simcha and Shiva is Mechayev Avelus, those are mutually exclusive. There's no way that you can integrate the days of Yantif into Shiva. Telo Naga Mitzvah Shiva Beregel. There's no manifestation of Avelus during the regel. This is a difficult piece of Gemara because the Ramban says that during Avelus, during regel, he's knowing Dvarim Shebetzina. Oh, he quotes the Ramban. No, he doesn't quote the Ramban. He should have quoted the Ramban. Anyway. He coming by Leila Minyan Shlochim, the Kanaga Mitzvah Shlochim Beregel, they're both the Iser of Gilua and the Iser of Kibbutz apply both during Shloshim and during the Regel. Can we integrate the days of Shloshim into the days of Regel into the count of Shloshim? Amalei Eino Od. There's too much of a head-on collision between Regel and Shloshim, between Avelus and Simchas Yod. Those are mutually exclusive. We cannot count the days of Regel and integrate them into the days of Shloshim. Eisvei, I'll ask you a question from a Brisa. Hakovers Meiso Shnei Yomim Kodem LaRegel. So he only had 2 days of Shiva. So he hasn't really been Mekayim Shiva. Now the question is, does he have to begin after the Regel from the get-go, from 0? And the Brisa is Machadish Gevaldig Chiddush Avona Chamishi Yom Lachar Regel. We can count 2 days before the Regel, 5 days of Shiva after the Regel. 5 plus 2 is 7, which is a Pella because Shiva is what's called a Malos. Like, for example, we spoke before about Stam Nazir Shloshim Yom. That's a Malos of Shloshim Yom. If he becomes Tameh in the middle of those Shloshim Yom, then he starts from 0 again after he becomes Tameh. We cannot say, well, he observed his Nazirus for 13 days, so we'll count that towards the 30. No, it's a Malos. A Malos always has to be continuous and contiguous. Others can do work on his behalf. So what does this mean? Umalachto nasis al yidei acherim. Malachto nasis al yidei acherim. When? During the 5 days after the Regel. Or is this just a general? It doesn't sound like this is a general halach and shiva that others could do malacha for you. Or maybe it is. But do you have any notes on this by any chance? I unfortunately I left my Masechet back in Harnof. So. What does it mean? Malachto nasis al yidei acherim. I guess it means during the 5 days after Yontif. That's what I think it means. Wow. Okay, I don't know about the word tashlumin, but he's also sensitive to our question of before that a malotz requires consecutive days. So if we're tagging on 5 days after the regel to be mashlim his avelus of shiva, they don't have the same status. I guess there are 2 dinim in shiva. One is One is a kiyum gavra, and the other is niu. I guess in Hilchas niu we could be making and will allow others to do the malach. As far as the gavra is concerned, he has to be an ovel for another 5 days. And he could allow people to work in his house as long as it's bitzina. So normally he writes, an ovel is forbidden during Shiva to do work, or even to have others do work for him. So this is a special halacha, a dispensation and a leniency in the case of Hakovers Mesul Shnei Yomim Kodem Arega. Since the last 5 days of Shiva are more than a week removed from the burial itself, we are more lenient and allow others to work on his behalf. Okay, he doesn't tell you why exactly. But that's not his purpose. Also, he doesn't tell you what's the big chiddush here about avodah mishpachos, because it sounds like others can do work for him even b'far hesed. The ein rabbim is askim imo. So here we're talking about nichum avelim. We're not going to allow for nichum avelim during those 5 days. Why? So here we turn to the Avchav. Shekvar is asking bo bereket. So this is a pella. The Gemara seems to be assuming that there's nichum avelim during the rega. He writes here, during the 7 days of Shiva, the mourner is visited by people who offer him birth, although the various restrictions of Shiva do not apply on the regel, but paying condolence calls continues even during the Moed. That's a pellet. I know there's machlokas about Shabbos between the Ashkenazim and the Sfaradim, but I never heard that there's nichum avelim on a yontif. It's consequently the festival counts towards the 7 days in which condolence calls are paid, and they're not going to do. So all you need is 7 days of nichum avelim, and that includes the yontif itself, because there's nichum avelim on yontif. Kol shel domer, kol shu mishum avel regel mafsiko. V'chol shu mishum iskei rabim ein regel mafsiko. So whatever pertains to the avel himself is there's a din of regel mafsiko. So the restrictions of Shiva, which are observed by the avel, are suspended for the duration of the yontif, since we are dealing with a case where the yontif does not cancel Shiva. And the lost days of Shiva must be made up after the festival. But when we're talking about nichum avelim, ein regel mafsiko. You can do it. Nichum avelim is not antithetical to yontif. He writes here, the public may continue to pay condolence calls even during the yontif. I don't know why. All right, so this is where we'll stop here on the top of Daf Chaf Amid Aleph. And Mitzvah Hashem, we'll pick this up tomorrow.
I mean, it's just logical. You can't really stop people dropping by and wishing their good wishes.
Right. See, I would ask the following. Is nichum avelim a kiyum of avelus, which means covered a mess, or is it a kiyum of beinon lechavero, just to give a person a sense of, we're with you, we identify you're not alone in this world. If it's the former, then I think it should be also on yontif. And I'm pretty sure in Allah we paskin that we don't do nichum avelim on yontif, because nichum avelim is covered a mess. The Gemara says that if you don't have any relatives after the person died, he died without relatives, we set up an artificial nichum house. I never saw it. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it's in the books. Really? And they put up 10 men there and so forth and so on. So you see that nichum avelim is covered a mess. That's why it's halacha beis avel, because that's where the mess lived. And that's antithetical to yontif. I mean, we don't prava avelus on you. This is the day of sin.
We're always very particular not to.
Yeah. But if nichum avelim is beinon lechavero, it's another form of chesed. no different than Bikur Cholim and whatever. And Achnos Kala, then it should apply even on Yad. That's what the Gemara seems to be postulating, but I'm pretty sure we don't accept it, and I don't even think the Sfaradim have Bichum. Okay, then.
All right.
Thank you so much.